In the cold silence of deep space, where even the stars seemed like distant memories, a ship as black as the void it floated in drifted, undetected, across the cosmos. It wasn't a vessel meant to be found. It was meant to remain hidden, lost in time, forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Inside that dark metal shell, deep in its core, there lay a chamber sealed from the outside world. No light pierced through, no sound echoed within its walls. But within that chamber, something ancient stirred. A soft hum of energy, faint but growing, filled the air. The time had come. The warriors, once locked away for millennia, were about to awaken. The Zaman Capsule, a time capsule unlike any other, had remained dormant for over 500 years. Its passengers had been placed in suspended animation, waiting for the right moment to be called back to life. These warriors had not volunteered for this mission. No, they were chosen, or perhaps cursed, to sleep through time, forgotten by the universe they once fought for. But their sleep had a purpose. The galaxy was in chaos when they were sealed, and it was the wisdom of the ancient commanders to preserve what they could, hoping for a future when they would be needed again. And now, that future was upon them. The capsule systems, long dormant, sparked to life. Mechanical gears shifted, hissing softly as the internal atmosphere adjusted. One by one, the warriors within began to stir, their bodies adjusting to the flow of oxygen re-entering their lungs. Their minds, fogged by centuries of sleep, started to wake from their enforced hibernation. Captain Elena Markov was the first to open her eyes. She had been a fighter in a war that no longer existed, a soldier from a time when the galaxy was tearing itself apart from within. Her memories, still disjointed, flickered back into focus. She remembered the bloodshed, the planets that had burned, the rebellion that had failed, and the last desperate mission her unit had been sent on. The hell. Elena muttered, her voice hoarse and weak. She lifted a hand to her face, feeling the coldness of her own skin, as if her body was still catching up to the fact that she was alive again. The soft glow of the capsule's interior provided just enough light to see her surroundings. Pods, dozens of them, lined the walls around her. She could hear the soft hiss of life support systems rebooting, the subtle beeping of machines recalibrating the bodies of the others. One by one, her comrades were waking. Captain Markov. A voice cracked through the comm system. It was deeper, rougher than she remembered, but she recognized it instantly. Lieutenant Torvin Price, her second in command. "I'm here," she replied, standing up slowly. Her muscles felt stiff, like she'd been frozen in place for centuries. And in a way, she had. Torvin's pod was across the chamber, and she could see his silhouette sitting up inside. The rest of their team was also beginning to move, though slowly. They were all soldiers from another era, a time when empires rose and fell with the firepower of their fleets. Back then, they had been elite, the best of the best. But now, Elena had no idea what they were waking up to. We made it," Torvin asked, his voice heavy with doubt as he stepped out of his pod. He was a large man, built like a tank, with a body that had seen its fair share of battle scars. Even now, disoriented as he was, there was an air of confidence to him. It was hard to rattle a man like Torvin. "Seems that way," Elena answered, rubbing her eyes as she looked at the chamber around them. "But I don't know where we are, or what year it is." More of the team was stirring now. Sergeant Davos, their weapons specialist, was already testing the movement of his fingers, adjusting to the feel of reality again. Kira Run, their scout and tech expert, was muttering something about systems diagnostics as she reconnected herself to the capsule's mainframe, trying to make sense of what had happened while they were asleep. But the question on all their minds was the same. Why now? The mission they had been sent on, all those centuries ago, was meant to be their last. They were supposed to awaken when the galaxy was in desperate need of them again. But alas, they knew the galaxy had been on the verge of collapse. Was it even still there? "Captain, you might want to see this." Kira's voice broke through Elena's thoughts, a hint of alarm creeping into her usually calm tone. Elena moved toward her, her muscles still stiff, but her mind sharp. Kira was standing by the main terminal, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen as streams of data flowed in front of her. "What is it?" Elena asked, her eyes scanning the readouts. "We're nowhere near where we were supposed to be," Kira said, her voice tight. "According to the star charts, we're light years away from our original destination. This system, it's not even in the same sector we were supposed to wake up in." Elena frowned, trying to make sense of the information in front of her. "Then where are we?" "I don't know," Kira admitted, tapping furiously at the controls. "The star maps don't match up with anything we had on record. It's like the galaxy shifted while we were asleep." "Shifted?" Torvin grunted, stepping up beside them. "That's impossible. Planets don't just move." "Not planets," Kira corrected him. "Time. We're not just out of place, we're out of time. Whatever's happened out there, it's changed the very fabric of the galaxy. This isn't the universe we went to sleep in." A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of Kira's words sunk in. Elena's mind raced, trying to process the implications. If they were light years away from their intended location, and if the galaxy had changed, what else had they missed? "Get the rest of the team up and running," Elena ordered, her voice more focused now. "We need to figure out what the hell is going on. Fast." The warriors, each still groggy from their centuries-long sleep, began to gather their wits about them. The Zaman Capsule was not just a ship. It was a relic, a lifeline to a time long past, and now they were its survivors. But survivors of what, exactly? Elena moved to the central control panel, staring down at the galaxy map displayed before her. It was unfamiliar, like looking at a stranger's face. The stars she had known, the system she had fought for, were distant memories now, out of reach. A faint signal flickered on the map, barely noticeable at first. But as Elena stared at it, she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just a signal. It was a distress beacon. "Captain," Kira's voice was quiet now, almost as if she didn't want to say it. "That signal, it's coming from one of our old outposts. But the logs say that base was abandoned over 300 years ago." Elena felt the cold weight of reality settle over her. Whatever they had been awakened for, whatever future they had been preserved to protect, was already here, and it was already in danger. The distress beacon blinked slowly on the console, a tiny red light pulsing in rhythm with Elena's rising anxiety. For 300 years, that outpost had been abandoned, left to the ravages of time and space. Yet somehow, it was still sending a signal. Something, or someone, was out there. "Elena," Torvin's voice cut through the silence. "Whatever's out there, it's been waiting a long time. You sure we want to answer that call?" The captain stared at the blinking light a moment longer before responding. "We didn't get pulled out of stasis for no reason, Torvin. Something woke us up. If that base is still broadcasting, then we need to find out why." Torvin grunted in his usual fashion, a mix of displeasure and reluctant agreement. Elena knew he wasn't one to back down from a fight, but none of them liked the idea of walking into the unknown, especially after being asleep for centuries. "Start the engines," Elena ordered, her voice hardening as she made her decision. "We head for the outpost." Kira nodded, her fingers dancing across the control panels, reactivating systems that had been dormant for too long. The hum of the ship's engines echoed through the chamber, a comforting sound that, for the first time in centuries, meant they were no longer stranded in the void. As the ship rumbled to life, the team went into action. The warriors of the Zaman Capsule had always been a well-oiled machine, a unit built to survive impossible odds. And though their skills were rusty, muscle memory was kicking in. Sergeant Davos was already inspecting the weapons cache, making sure their armaments were still functional after their long slumber. Blasters, pulse rifles, and the occasional melee weapon, all designed for a war that no longer existed, but ready for whatever this new galaxy might throw at them. Kira remained glued to the console, her focus intense as she analyzed the distress signal. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange about that beacon," she said. "It's been broadcasting continuously, but there's no other activity on the planet. No life signs, no transmissions. Nothing but static. That's impossible, Elena muttered. A signal that strong doesn't survive on its own. There's got to be something keeping it running. Kira shook her head, her brows furrowing. I can't explain it. All I know is the beacon shouldn't even be active after all this time. The power core alone should have burned out centuries ago. Could be a trap, Torvin said, ever the pessimist, his eyes narrowing at the console. Could be, Elena agreed, but we don't have the luxury of ignoring it. We need to know what's out there, and if this galaxy has changed as much as it seems, we're already behind the curve. We need intel. The ship adjusted course, heading toward the beacon's origin point. On the screen, the planet loomed large, a dead rock, barren and cold. It wasn't a place anyone would voluntarily go, and yet, it held a piece of their past. It was one of the last outposts established before the fall of their empire, a strategic point meant to protect vital resources. As they approached, Elena couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The mission that had once consumed them, the war they fought to prevent, was now nothing more than a distant memory. The galaxy had moved on without them, but here they were, relics of a time long gone, trying to piece together the remnants of a world they no longer recognized. Entering the planet's orbit, Kira announced, her voice steady. Bringing up visuals now. The screen flickered to life, showing the surface of the planet below. It was a wasteland, a desolate expanse of craters and rocky outcroppings. The outpost itself was barely visible, a small structure nestled among the barren landscape, half buried in the dust of time. Looks like it hasn't seen visitors in centuries, Torvin muttered, crossing his arms over his chest. We'll be the first, Elena said, her tone grim. Prep for landing. Full combat loadout. We don't know what we're walking into, so I want everyone ready for anything. The team suited up quickly. Their gear, once pristine and cutting-edge, now felt like relics from another era. The armor plates had a dull sheen, and the helmets, though functional, were outdated by any modern standards. But it was what they had, and it would have to be enough. Davos slung a heavy pulse rifle over his shoulder, checking the charge. Feels good to hold this beast again, he said with a grin, his voice a low rumble. Kira, always more comfortable with tech than weapons, strapped a compact blaster to her hip, her fingers twitching nervously. Let's hope we don't have to use them, she muttered. Hopes for amateurs, Torvin grumbled, fastening his helmet. The ship touched down with a soft thud, sending up a cloud of dust that obscured the view outside. Elena took a deep breath as the ramp descended, the stale, recycled air of the ship mixing with the cold, sterile atmosphere of the planet. The wind was harsh, biting at their exposed skin, and the sky above was a sickly shade of gray, as if the planet itself was dying a slow, miserable death. Keep your eyes sharp, Elena ordered as they stepped out onto the barren surface. I don't want any surprises. The outpost loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the rocky terrain. It was smaller than Elena had expected, more of a bunker than a full-fledged base. The doors, rusted and worn, creaked as they approached. Power still active, Kira said, her eyes scanning the readouts on her wrist. Barely, but it's there. Enough to keep the systems running. Let's see if it's enough to open the damn door, Torvin muttered, stepping forward. He gripped the manual release lever, putting his considerable strength into it. With a loud groan, the doors parted, revealing the darkness within. The air inside was stale and thick with dust, as if it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. Elena's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a corridor lined with ancient technology. Consoles flickered weakly, their screens cracked and flickering, but there was enough power left to keep the beacon going. Stick close, Elena said, her voice echoing through the empty halls. We're not alone here. The deeper they went, the more uneasy Elena felt. Something was wrong. The outpost was too quiet, too empty. It was as if time itself had stopped in this place. Captain. Kira's voice was tight with tension. I'm picking up something. Faint energy readings coming from deeper inside the base. Could be the beacon, Elena said, though she didn't believe it herself. Something about this place felt off. They followed Kira's lead, moving through the narrow corridors until they reached a central chamber. The door was half open, the mechanisms corroded with age. Inside, a single console flickered weakly, its screen covered in static. "This is it," Kira said, her voice barely a whisper. "The beacon's controls." Elena approached the console, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the controls. But before she could touch it, the screen flickered to life, displaying a message that chilled her to the bone. "We were wrong. They're still here." The words burned into her mind as the console powered down, the beacon's signal going silent. "What the hell does that mean?" Torvin asked, his voice low. But Elena had no answer. Whatever had happened here, whatever had kept this outpost running for 300 years, wasn't gone. And now they had woken it up. The silence that followed was as heavy as the cold air around them. The words on the screen, "We were wrong. They're still here," hung in the air like a dark omen. Elena stared at the console, her mind racing through every possibility. Who, or what, was still here? And what had they been wrong about? Kira moved closer, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped the console, trying to reactivate the message, but it was no use. The system was as dead as the outpost itself. "That's it," Torvin grunted. "We came all the way out here for some cryptic message. What kind of bullshit is this?" Elena shook her head, pulling her thoughts together. "There's more to this. There has to be." Kira frowned, her eyes glued to the flickering screens around them. "Captain, the energy readings, they're spiking. Whatever's still running in this place, it's drawing power from something else. And it's getting stronger." Davos, who had been scanning the room with his weapon raised, turned toward them, his usually calm demeanor beginning to crack. "If something's waking up, I'd rather not stick around for it to get friendly." Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing on her. She knew they couldn't just leave. There was too much at stake. If something had survived here, if something dangerous was still alive after 300 years, they needed to know what it was before it found them first. "Torvin, Davos, sweep the lower levels," Elena ordered, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "Kira, stay here and see what else you can pull from the system. I want to know who sent that message and what the hell is going on." Torvin gave a sharp nod, already heading toward the corridor leading deeper into the outpost. Davos followed without a word, his rifle raised, eyes scanning every shadow as if expecting something to jump out at them. Kira stayed behind, her attention focused on the terminal as she tried to bypass the ancient systems, her fingers moving quickly across the controls. Elena took a deep breath and followed Torvin and Davos down the corridor, her mind racing. The outpost felt more like a tomb now, the weight of history pressing down on them from every corner. The corridors were dimly lit, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Dust hung in the air, swirling around them with every step, as if the place itself was slowly decaying into oblivion. The lower levels of the outpost were colder, the chill biting through Elena's suit. The metal walls were covered in frost, and the air felt thicker, almost suffocating. She could hear the faint hum of machinery somewhere in the distance, but it was hard to tell where it was coming from. "This place is a goddamn maze," Torvin muttered, his voice low and tense. "I don't like it." Davos scanned the area, his rifle ready. "It's too quiet, even for a dead base." Elena knew what he meant. In a place like this, there should have been more noise. The whir of old machines, the hum of energy conduits, even the occasional creak of metal shifting with the weight of time. But there was nothing, just silence. They reached a door at the end of the corridor, larger than the others they had passed. It looked more fortified, as if it was meant to protect whatever lay behind it. "Looks like this is it," Elena said, stepping forward. Torvin reached for the manual override, but the door hissed open on its own before he could touch it. They exchanged uneasy glances. "That's not creepy at all," Davos muttered. Elena moved inside, her weapon raised. The room beyond was larger than any they had seen so far, and unlike the rest of the outpost, it was well lit. Banks of old computers lined the walls, their screens flickering with data. But the most disturbing sight was in the center of the room. There, in a row of glass pods, were bodies. Elena froze, her heart pounding. There were at least a dozen of them, floating in stasis chambers, their faces peaceful, as if they had been sleeping for centuries. "What the hell is this?" Torvin whispered, his usual bravado cracking at the sight. Davos moved forward, his rifle still raised. "Are they alive?" Elena stepped closer to the pods, her eyes narrowing as she studied the figures inside. They looked human, but something about them was off. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their features were too perfect, like they had been engineered. "They've been in stasis, just like us," Elena said, her voice low. "But this tech, it's older. Much older than ours." Kira's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, I'm getting strange readings from your location. Whatever you just walked into, it's connected to the beacon. I think these pods are drawing power directly from the main system." Elena nodded, barely hearing Kira as she stared at the figures in the pods. "We need to know who they are." She reached out to the control panel next to one of the pods, her fingers hovering over the buttons. Before she could press anything, the lights in the room flickered, and a low, mechanical voice filled the air. "Unauthorized access detected. Security protocols engaged." The words sent a chill down Elena's spine. "That can't be good," Davos muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. The lights flickered again, and the pods began to hum, the energy levels spiking. Elena stepped back, her eyes widening as the glass on the first pod began to crack. "Get back," she shouted, grabbing Torvin and pulling him away from the pods just as the first one shattered. The figure inside slumped forward, its body falling to the ground with a sickening thud. Elena aimed her weapon at it, her finger hovering over the trigger. For a moment, nothing happened. The figure lay still, unmoving. Then, slowly, it twitched. "Oh, hell no," Torvin muttered, stepping back, his eyes wide. The figure moved again, its body jerking unnaturally as it pushed itself up from the floor. Its head lifted, and for the first time, Elena saw its eyes. They were completely black, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. "Fires!" Elena shouted, but before any of them could react, the creature lunged forward, moving faster than anything they'd ever seen. Davos fired first, his pulse rifle lighting up the room as he unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The creature staggered back, but it didn't fall. It kept coming, its body absorbing the energy like it was nothing. "Shit!" Davos cursed, backing up as he reloaded. Elena fired next, aiming for its head. The blast hit it square in the face, sending it crashing into one of the consoles. For a moment, it lay still, smoke rising from the wound. "Is it dead?" Torvin asked, his voice shaky. Elena didn't answer. She kept her weapon trained on the creature, waiting for it to move again. And then, slowly, it did. The creature's head jerked up, its black eyes locking onto Elena. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent a chill down her spine. "Fall back," she ordered, backing toward the door. But before they could make their escape, the rest of the pods began to hum. The glass cracked, one by one, as the figures inside began to stir. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Torvin muttered, his voice full of dread. Elena's heart raced as she realized what was happening. They had woken something up, something ancient, something that had been waiting in the dark for far too long. "Move," she shouted, shoving Torvin toward the door as the creatures began to rise from their pods. They bolted down the corridor, the sound of shattering glass and inhuman growls echoing behind them. Elena didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew they were being hunted. The sound of inhuman growls echoed through the narrow corridors as Elena, Torvin, and Davos ran for their lives, their boots pounding against the cold metal floor. The creatures were fast, faster than anything they had ever faced before, and they were closing the distance. "Keep moving," Elena shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of their panicked footsteps and the monstrous sounds behind them. "Captain, what the hell were those things?" Davos yelled, his breath coming in heavy gasps as he struggled to keep pace. His pulse rifle was still clutched tightly in his hands, but even he knew that firing now would only slow them down. "No idea, but I know we don't want to get caught," Elena snapped back, her mind racing. Kira's voice came over the comms, crackling with urgency. "Captain, I'm picking up movement all over the base. Whatever you did down there, you triggered some kind of automated defense system. It's not a damn defense system." Elena barked into her comm, her voice strained. "It's a fucking nightmare. We've got hostiles, some kind of creatures. Get the ship prepped for immediate evac." There was a pause before Kira responded, her voice tense. "I'll have it ready, but you need to move fast. Those energy readings are off the charts. It's like the entire outpost is waking up." Elena cursed under her breath. "Great. Just what we needed." They rounded a corner, the dim lights flickering above them as they sprinted down another long corridor. Elena could hear the creatures gaining on them, their guttural growls growing louder and more vicious with every second. "We're not going to make it to the ship in time at this rate," Torvin growled, his usual gruffness replaced with genuine fear. Elena knew he was right. The creatures were faster, stronger, and relentless. They needed a plan, and fast. There. Davos pointed to a sealed hatch up ahead, his voice strained from the exertion. "We could seal ourselves in, and by some time..." Elena nodded, already moving toward the hatch. "Torvin, get open." Torvin didn't need to be told twice. He rushed forward, slamming his fist into the manual release lever. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing a small maintenance bay beyond. They piled inside, and Torvin slammed the door shut just as the creatures rounded the corner behind them. The sound of their snarls and pounding footsteps reverberated through the door, but for the moment, the heavy metal held. Elena pressed her back against the wall, catching her breath. "Kira, how long until you've got the ship prepped?" "Maybe 10 minutes, if I push it." "These systems are ancient," Kira replied, her voice tinged with worry. "Whatever you woke up down there, it's not happy." Elena glanced at Torvin and Davos, both of whom were leaning against the wall, weapons ready. "We don't have 10 minutes, she muttered. The sound of something slamming against the door echoed through the small room, causing all three of them to jump. The creatures were trying to break through. "They're not going to give up, are they?" Davos said grimly, his pulse rifle aimed at the door. "Doesn't look like it," Elena replied, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We need a plan. We can't just sit here waiting for them to tear that door down." Torvin, who had been silent for a few moments, finally spoke up. "We could use the maintenance tunnels. This place has to have some kind of emergency escape route." Elena considered it for a moment. The maintenance tunnels were a maze, but it might be their only shot at getting out of here alive. And it would buy them time. "Do it," she said, moving to the control panel next to the hatch. She brought up a schematic of the outpost, scanning for any indication of where the tunnels led. "They run beneath the base," she said, pointing to the screen. "It looks like there's a shaft that connects to the landing bay. If we can get through the tunnels, we'll come up right near the ship." Torvin grinned. "Better than waiting around for these bastards to rip us apart." Another loud bang against the door reminded them just how little time they had. Elena pulled the panel open, revealing a narrow passage leading into the tunnels below. "Go," she ordered, motioning for Torvin and Davos to move. "I'll cover the rear." Davos climbed down first, his bulky frame barely squeezing through the opening. Torvin followed quickly behind, his large hands gripping the ladder rungs as he descended into the darkness. Elena took one last glance at the door, now beginning to buckle under the pressure of the creatures on the other side, before climbing down into the maintenance tunnels herself. The moment her feet hit the ground, she felt the oppressive weight of the tunnels pressing in on her. The walls were close, claustrophobic, and the air smelled of rust and decay. Dim lights flickered along the ceiling, casting eerie shadows that danced with every movement. "Keep moving," Elena urged, her voice low but firm. "We need to get to the other side before those things figure out we're down here." Torvin led the way, his large frame hunched as he navigated the narrow passageways. Davos was right behind him, his rifle held ready for anything that might come at them from the dark. Elena brought up the rear, her senses on high alert. The tunnels twisted and turned, branching off into different directions. It would be easy to get lost down here, and Elena could only hope that the schematics she had memorized were accurate. How much further? Davos asked, his voice echoing softly in the cramped space. Not far, Elena replied, checking the map on her wrist display. The exit should be just up ahead, but before they could reach the next junction, a loud crash echoed from behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of the creatures. They found the tunnel. Torvin growled, quickening his pace. Elena cursed under her breath. Move faster. The creatures were closing in, their growls growing louder as they tore through the tunnel behind them. The narrow space made it impossible for them to move quickly, but the creatures were relentless, squeezing through the tight passage with terrifying speed. Torvin reached the exit hatch first, slamming his fist into the release. The door hissed open, revealing a ladder leading up to the surface. Go, go, go! Elena shouted, covering their retreat as Davos scrambled up the ladder. Torvin followed, his large hands gripping the rungs as he pulled himself up. Elena fired a few shots down the tunnel, the blasts lighting up the dark space and momentarily slowing the creatures. But it wasn't enough to stop them. She turned and leapt for the ladder, pulling herself up as fast as she could. The creatures were right behind her now, their snarls filling the tunnel, echoing in her ears as she climbed. The moment she reached the top, Davos slammed the hatch shut, sealing it with a heavy clang. For a moment, there was silence. Elena collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. That was too damn close. No kidding, Torvin grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. Those things, they don't stop. Davos checked his weapon, his hands shaking slightly. We need to get the hell out of here before they find another way in. Elena nodded, pushing herself to her feet. We're almost to the ship. Let's move. They emerged into the landing bay, the cold air of the planet hitting them like a slap in the face. The ship was just ahead, its engines powered up and ready for takeoff. Captain, the ship's prepped and ready. Kira's voice crackled over the comms. But we've got a problem. I'm picking up movement outside the base. More of those creatures. They're coming from the surface now. Elena's stomach dropped. How many? A lot, Kira replied, her voice grim. More than we can handle. Elena's mind raced. The creatures were everywhere, and they were outnumbered. They needed a way out, and fast. Get on the ship now, Elena ordered, sprinting toward the vessel. Torvin and Davos followed, their weapons ready as they approached the ship's ramp. But as they neared the ship, the ground beneath them shook, a deep, rumbling vibration that sent a wave of fear through Elena's chest. What the hell now? Torvin growled, turning toward the source of the tremor. The ground cracked, and from the fissures, more of the creatures began to emerge, clawing their way up from the depths of the planet. Shit! Davos shouted, firing his rifle at the nearest creature. They're everywhere. Elena fired her weapon, cutting down two of the creatures as they charged toward the ship. Get on board, now. The team sprinted up the ramp, the creatures closing in from all sides. The moment they were inside, Kira slammed the hatch shut, the sound of the creatures pounding against the hull echoing through the ship. Punch it, Kira, Elena shouted, collapsing into the co-pilot's seat. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the ground, the creatures still swarming below. As the ship rocketed into the sky, Elena leaned back in her seat, her heart still racing. They had escaped, but just barely. Captain, Kira said, her voice quiet. What the hell were those things? Elena stared out at the barren planet below, her mind still reeling from the encounter. I don't know, she muttered, but we need to find out. Fast. The ship hummed quietly as it soared through the empty void of space, the barren planet growing smaller in the distance. Inside, the crew sat in a tense silence, their minds still reeling from the chaos they had just escaped. Elena, slumped in the co-pilot's seat, stared out at the stars, her mind racing with unanswered questions. Those creatures, they weren't just a threat. They were a warning. And whatever had happened down on that planet was just the beginning. "Kira, get me a full scan of the surrounding systems," Elena ordered, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. "We need to figure out what's happening out here." Kira tapped away at the console, her eyes narrowing as the data poured in. "I'm already on it, Captain, but something's off. I'm detecting more of those strange energy signatures in nearby systems. Whatever we triggered down there, it's spreading." Elena's grip tightened on the armrest. "How widespread?" "Too widespread," Kira muttered, her fingers dancing over the keys. "This isn't isolated. The creatures we saw, they're showing up on other planets, too. We're looking at multiple outbreaks, all connected to old outposts like the one we just left." Davos, standing near the back of the cockpit, crossed his arms, his face set in a grim scowl. "So these things have been hiding in the dark for centuries, just waiting to be unleashed." "Looks that way," Kira replied, her voice hollow. "And we just opened floodgates." Elena swore under her breath, leaning forward to study the readouts on Kira's console. This wasn't just a threat to them, it was a threat to the entire galaxy. Those creatures weren't natural. They were engineered. Someone long ago had created them, and now they were free. "What do we know about the origin of these things?" Elena asked, her tone sharp. "Where did they come from, and who made them?" Kira frowned, scrolling through the ancient files they had salvaged from the outpost. "I've been going through the archives, but there's not much left. Most of the data is corrupted, but from what I can piece together, these creatures were part of an old war, a last-ditch effort by a rogue faction. They created them as biological weapons, designed to adapt and evolve over time. But something went wrong. The creatures became uncontrollable, so they were sealed away in those outposts, buried under tons of rock and metal, left to rot. But they didn't rot," Torvin muttered, leaning against the bulkhead. "They waited, and we woke them up." Elena nodded, her jaw clenched. "Whoever made them, whatever their plan was, it failed. But now we're the ones dealing with the consequences. We need to figure out a way to stop this before it spreads any further." "Captain," Kira interrupted, her voice tense. "I'm picking up a distress signal. Another one. But this time, it's not from an outpost." Elena's head snapped toward her. "Where's it coming from?" "From deep space." "A nearby system," Kira replied, her eyes scanning the data. "It's faint, but it's definitely a signal from a ship. And it's coming from a sector that's supposed to be uninhabited." "Uninhabited," Torvin grumbled, rubbing his chin. "Why the hell would a ship be out there?" Elena didn't have an answer, but something about the signal made her uneasy. It felt like a trap, like they were being lured into something far bigger than they understood. But they couldn't ignore it. If there were survivors out there, if someone else was dealing with these creatures, they needed to know what was going on. "Set a course for the signal," Elena ordered, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We need answers, and this is the only lead we've got." Kira nodded, and the ship's engines rumbled as they changed direction, heading deeper into the unknown. The system they entered was dark, its star dim and dying, casting a pale light over the surrounding planets. The signal had grown stronger as they approached, but it was still faint, as if whoever had sent it was barely holding on. Bringing it up on the main screen, Kira said, her fingers tapping the console. The display flickered to life, showing a ship, old, battered, and barely functioning. It drifted aimlessly through space, its hull covered in scorch marks and debris. "Looks like it's been through hell," Davos muttered, narrowing his eyes. "It's a miracle it's still in one piece," Torvin added, his voice grim. "We docking with that wreck?" Elena nodded. "We don't have a choice. If there's anyone left on board, we need to talk to them." The docking procedure was slow and tense. The ship's systems were barely functional, and it took Kira's technical skill to force a manual override. When the docking clamps finally engaged, Elena and her team geared up, ready for whatever they might find inside. The airlock opened with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond. The lights flickered weakly, and the sound of distant creaks and groans echoed through the ship, as if it were on the verge of falling apart. "Stay sharp," Elena said, her voice low, as they stepped inside. The ship was eerily quiet. There were no signs of life, no crew, no movement, just silence. "Where the hell is everyone?" Davos asked, his pulse rifle raised as they moved deeper into the ship. "Could be hiding," Kira suggested, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe it. Elena's eyes scanned the darkened corridor, her hand gripping her blaster tightly. Something felt off. This wasn't just a damaged ship. They had been through enough battles to know the difference. This was something else. They reached the bridge, the doors sliding open with a groan. Inside, they found the source of the signal, a lone figure, slumped over in the captain's chair. Elena stepped forward cautiously, her weapon still drawn. The figure didn't move. As she got closer, she realized why. It was a body, long dead, its face frozen in a grimace of pain. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the uniform. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the insignia on the chest. It was from their time, the same empire they had once fought for. "Captain," Kira whispered, her voice shaky. "This ship, it's from our time." Elena swallowed hard, her mind reeling. "But that's impossible. We're centuries into the future. How could this ship be yours?" Before Kira could answer, the ship's systems flickered to life. The lights on the bridge brightened, and the main console beeped as a message began to play. The voice that came through was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, it's already too late. The war we thought we ended, it's still going. They never stopped. And now, they're coming for you." The message cut off, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the ship shook. Elena's eyes widened as alarms blared through the ship, the red emergency lights flashing. What the hell is happening? Kira's fingers flew across the console, trying to make sense of the data. "We're under attack. Hostiles incoming. It's the creatures. They're swarming us." Elena's stomach dropped. "Get back to the ship, now." They bolted for the airlock, the ship shaking violently as the creatures began to tear through the hull. Elena could hear their guttural growls, growing louder with every passing second. They reached the airlock just as the creatures broke through the walls, their black eyes glowing in the darkness. "Seal it," Elena shouted, slamming the door shut as they made it back aboard their own ship. "Kira, get us out of here," Torvin yelled, bracing himself against the bulkhead. The ship's engines roared to life, and they blasted away from the wreckage, the creatures swarming the dying ship behind them. Elena watched as the old vessel was torn apart, its hull disintegrating under the onslaught. But the creatures didn't stop. They turned their attention to Elena's ship, closing in fast. "We can't outrun them," Kira said, her voice tight with fear. Elena's mind raced. They couldn't fight these things head-on. Not like this. They needed a way out, anything that would give them a chance. And then it hit her. "The stasis pods," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can put ourselves back in stasis, just like before. It's the only way." Torvin stared at her, his eyes wide. "You want us to go back to sleep? Are you insane?" "It's the only way," Elena insisted. "If we stay awake, they'll find us. But if we go into stasis, the ship will shut down. They won't see us. We'll disappear." Davos nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "She's right. It's our only shot." Kira hesitated, but then she gave a reluctant nod. "I can set the system to autopilot. Once we're in stasis, the ship will drift. Hopefully, far enough away that they won't find us." Elena didn't waste any more time. "Do it." They rushed to the stasis chamber, their hearts pounding as the creatures closed in. Kira activated the pods, the familiar hum filling the air as they prepared to go back into suspended animation. As Elena climbed into her pod, she took one last look at her team. They had been through hell together, and now they were about to go through it again. But it was the only way. The pod sealed around her, the cold embrace of stasis taking hold. Her last thought, before the darkness swallowed her, was simple. Would they survive this time? As the ship drifted through the vast emptiness of space, silent and hidden from the creatures that hunted it, the Zaman Capsulus warriors slept once more. But this time, they weren't just fighting for a forgotten war. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. And that, my friend, brings us to the final showdown. The warriors in the time capsule have returned to stasis, but the fight is far from over. What do you think? Should we leave it there or continue when they wake up? If they wake up,